Why would a beloved king order the execution of a dead body exposed to such public disgrace? On a cold morning in January 1661, an eager and angry crowd gathered in the streets of London, preparing to witness a brutal scene, an event that would go down in English history as a symbol of horror. They were awaiting the execution of a lost body, that of Oliver Cromwell, the man who had overthrown the monarchy and beheaded a king. The order of his successor, King Charles II, was to exhume Cromwell's body, which had died of illness 2 years earlier, from its tomb in Westminster Abbey. The haunting journey began when his badly decomposed body was dragged through the streets, wrapped in a dirty shroud, and brought to Tyburn, a place famous for its gruesome executions. The body was hung on the gallows, exposed to the crowd as a warning. After hours of display, the mangled corpse was beheaded, his head impaled on a 6-meter pole, displayed on the roof of Westminster Hall in public humiliation. But this was not the height of the brutality. In an act designed to crush any resistance, Cromwell's testicles were publicly removed and displayed as a powerful symbol of the destruction of power that had dared to challenge the throne. The humiliating corpse, exposed to the wind and rain, remained a horrifying reminder for more than 20 years, a bloody mark for anyone who would dare to dream of opposing the monarchy. From a beloved king, with the image of a merry king who loved parties, women and the arts, Charles II transformed himself into a ruthless avenger, one who was willing to throw away all human values to protect his power. To understand this transformation, we must turn to Charles II's past, a tumultuous past, events that shaped the reign of hatred and restoration he led. Charles Stuart, born on 29 May 1630, was the son of King Charles I and Queen Henrietta Maria of France. As heir to the throne, the young prince grew up surrounded by the luxury and ceremony of the Stuart court, taught to inherit the divine authority he believed was his birthright. However, the world he was destined to inherit was crumbling. His father, Charles I, believed firmly in the divine right of kings, believing that monarchs were chosen by God and obeyed only his commands. This view brought him into conflict with the English Parliament. As a young Charles, he witnessed the political and religious tensions that led to the English Civil War in 1642, when he was only 12 years old. The war divided the country into factions, those loyal to the monarchy and those who supported Parliament. This devastating war not only disrupted the long-standing social order, but also brought about a major change in Charles's life. In 1645, at the age of 15, he was given command of the royalist forces in the west of England. However, the royalist defeat in 1646 forced him into exile. From afar, he witnessed the event that forever changed his worldview and ignited his hatred for his enemies. Can anyone imagine the horror of a young prince when his father was publicly executed, a bloody and unforgivable punishment? On the 30th of January, 1649, a grisly event tore the curtain of the dynasty when King Charles I, the head of England, was publicly executed in London. The reason? He was accused of treason, an unforgivable crime when the throne he ruled was overthrown right under his feet. The death of Charles I became a haunting milestone, deeply engraved in the mind of his only son, Charles II. When he heard of his father's death, the young prince's anger flared up fiercely. In a fit of rage, he tore his clothes, vowing not to overlook this insult. At just 18 years old, Charles II declared himself king, but his power was little more than a shadow. Without a kingdom, without a throne, he was left with only the months that followed were long and miserable, as Charles II relied on the charity of relatives, friends, and allies. He slept in borrowed palaces at night, living in want, with his former possessions now a distant memory. It was an unforgettable humiliation for a man born to rule the English kingdom. Can a nation endure the spectre of revenge, and can it change the face of a nation forever? While Charles II endured a humiliating exile, in England, Oliver Cromwell was building his own empire as Lord Protector, but in reality as a military dictator. Under the guise of the Commonwealth, Cromwell transformed the country into a semi-theocracy. Festivals were banned, theatres were closed, and harsh morals were imposed on society. During his 11 years in the shadows, Charles II plotted his return, navigating the treacherous waters of European politics. In 1651, he even led an army against Cromwell, but was defeated miserably at the Battle of Worcester. However, this was only the beginning of an extraordinary escape. With a large reward on his head, Charles II fled through occupied England for 6 weeks. A legend was born as he hid under the oak leaves while Cromwell's soldiers searched beneath him. The oak tree now symbolized his survival and his desire for revenge. Eventually, with the help of his loyal network, Charles II fled to France disguised as a servant. His years in exile had shaped Charles II into a king who knew not only how to survive, but also how to seize opportunities. Through France, Germany, Spain, and the Netherlands, he learned how to play politics, and more importantly, his unquenchable thirst for revenge against those who had destroyed his family and inheritance. Charles II lived a life of extravagance, with lavish parties and numerous lovers, all on borrowed money, to the dismay of even the French. But behind this image was a determined man who never gave up on his ultimate goal, to regain the throne. When Oliver Cromwell died in September 1658, his son Richard was unable to maintain his father's power. The English Republic fell into chaos and dissension, and Charles II saw this as a golden opportunity to make a comeback. The Cavalier Parliament, elected in 1661, filled with fervent royalists, quickly entered into negotiations with Charles. In April 1660, Charles issued the Declaration of Breda, a clever move that granted amnesty to his enemies, promised religious tolerance, and pledged to pay his army. However, all this was merely a diplomatic strategy to secure his return. On 29 May 1660, his 30th birthday, Charles II returned to London to rapturous crowds. But behind that joy, he carried a bloody plan of revenge. Once safely on the throne, he did not forget those who had caused his father's death. Starting with those who had signed the death warrant for King Charles I, Charles II publicly executed those responsible, including 10 who suffered brutal deaths, hanging, disembowelment, and beheading in front of the crowd. These scenes shook the whole city. However, the real revenge was only on the dead. The bodies of Cromwell, Ireton, and Bradshaw, who had ordered the murder of Charles II's father, were exhumed and executed after death. In particular, Cromwell's genital mutilation symbolized an unforgivable humiliation. This was an act of revenge that was not simply a return of power, but also a spiritual punishment, a warning to those who dared to challenge the power of the Stuart dynasty. Cromwell's body remained hanging with his head hanging for many years, a symbol of failure and guilt. Can revenge change a dynasty and reshape the future of a nation? Charles II's revenge was not just a political or religious battle. It was a study in conflict and power. The restored king not only remade the monarchy, but also restored what had been crushed under Oliver Cromwell. To the public, he projected an image of pleasure and joy, reopening theatres, holding festivals, and making his court a symbol of luxury, a radical departure from the harsh principles of the Puritans. Behind the lavish exterior, however, Charles II was a tireless worker and a cunning politician who had never forgotten the hard lessons of his exile. His return was not just a restoration of power, but also a reinvention of his own image. Unlike his father, who was a decent and formal, Charles II was simple and close to the people. He often strolled through St. James's Park, accompanied only by his hunting dogs. While Charles I was known for being dry and austere, Charles II thrilled the crowds with his romantic affairs, fathering 14 illegitimate children with women ranging from actresses to courtesans to an orange seller. While this may have seemed frivolous, it hid a strong determination never again to endure exile and humiliation. Realizing that his survival depended on his political dexterity, Charles II was always cautious in his decisions. He faced terrible challenges: the plague of 1665 that killed nearly a quarter of London's population, and the Great Fire of 1666 that destroyed much of the capital. However, it was his presence in London during those dark hours, when he oversaw the firefighting efforts and helped the people, that strengthened his image as a king who genuinely cared about his people, an image that stood in stark contrast to his father. However, nothing tested his authority more than his skepticism about Catholicism. His brother, James, Duke of York, had converted to Catholicism, and Charles II himself was rumored to be secretly Catholic. When the Catholic plot of 1678 broke out, Charles responded pragmatically. He authorized the execution of innocent Catholics to appease public anger, but also protected other Catholics, including his brother, in secret. In this struggle, he successfully defeated the Exclusion Bill, protecting his brother's succession. With secret financial support from King Louis XIV of France, Charles II ruled without calling Parliament, making him a symbol of absolute power. However, the price for this independence was a pro-French foreign policy and tacit tolerance to Catholicism. These concessions were made to consolidate power at home, and his reign became a series of inexplicable contradictions. When we look back at the reign of Charles II, we see a man who was not only brutally vengeful but also compassionate, a confrontation between power and mercy. He ordered public executions, but also carefully rebuilt the nation after crises. The restoration of royal buildings such as Whitehall and Windsor Castle was not only a symbol of power, but also a mark of the return of a powerful dynasty, rejecting any challenge from the Republic. Charles II was a complex symbol of power and humanity. His reign was the end of an era of suffering and the beginning of a new era, where monarchical power was based not only on force, but also on political wisdom. His revenge was not just the act of a father who had lost his throne, but also a conflicted battle to preserve the existence of a monarchy in a new era. When power is built on revenge, can it last, or will it collapse in its own brutality?